Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Alistair, very much. Don't worry about these sheets of paper. It's very, very large font here. Look, 4 minutes isn't long, so I'm not going to try the humorous intro, and I'm going to just kick into it. And I just want to acknowledge the really terrible events that have happened here recently. And I'm sure that's helped you all be familiar with the notion that it's good and useful sometimes to talk about, how you're feeling, talk about tough times. And that can be quite straightforward and easy, and I think we're all quite good talkers when we're in a good space. It's easy to talk when you're feeling happy. When how you're feeling is actually scared or anxious or worthless, talking about that is suddenly quite a lot more difficult. So I'm a rural GP, as Alistair said, which is a great job. Excuse me. Very varied. Anything can happen, which is both its joy and also the biggest challenge. So we deal with trauma, emotional trauma, often, on a daily basis. Basically it can be anything. It can be a car accident. It might be someone's had a miscarriage. It might be I'm trying to give someone a terrible diagnosis. Someone's having a relationship meltdown. We're confronted by this stuff all the time. And over the years, I've been thinking about this. I must have spent half my adult life saying to people, it's actually okay to feel really desperate. It's okay to feel uncertain. It's okay to feel scared. And I try really, really hard to make a space where people are able to feel safe to talk about stuff that's pretty painful and pretty personal. And I'm pretty good at it. Very ironic, therefore, that in 2017, I found myself to be in a really dark and scary and frightening place. And I didn't tell a soul. And a whole lot of stuff was going on, but particularly for me at that time, this was 6 years after the CTV building, which stupidly, in light of this talk, particularly stupidly, I'd never talked about in any meaningful way with anybody. And I just sort of pushed the nightmares a little bit to one side. And I was trying to deal with this growing sense of guilt I had about the fact we knew people were alive, we could hear people, and we couldn't get to them. And that had been just gnawing away at me. But I boxed on, because that's what blokes do. Hadn't talked about it. And the only reason I ever did talk about it was because I was essentially ambushed by my daughter. And on a drive down from home to Christchurch one day, she said, Dad, I want you to talk about that, because she was trying to understand it better, because she wanted to write a book. So we sat in the car and she started talking. I started talking, rather. And then the floodgates just opened and this whole terrible story came out. And I don't know who was more surprised out of Chessie or I, but we were both surprised by what had happened. And just what I remember, that's my tip for the evening is that car journeys are a really good place for a difficult conversation, because you've got enough time, you can't get away, and you don't have to look at each other. So the next time you want to ask your kids about their love life or what drugs they're taking at the festival, I suggest you try it in the car. So once all this floated to the surface or exploded to the surface, I then quite rapidly, over a few months, found that I just was coping less and less well with the normal high workload, the stresses, the stuff I was usually good at. I just was scrambled. I just got less and less and less good. And I started going down this very horrible and slippery slope until I dropped right off the cliff. So thanks, Chessie, very much. And I think the depressing thing about that is, despite all of my years' experience, the fact that I spend so much time talking to people about talking, that I wasn't able to sort of say, help, I need help. And I'll come back to this, but this is the key point, really. And I think I felt my vulnerability then, I felt that was a personal failure. I felt I had failed my family. I felt I'd failed my colleagues. And I felt I failed my community, and I love my community. So this is a difficult place. I bring it up now because I think it illustrates, or I'm trying to illustrate, there's a gap between knowing that it's good to talk about stuff, and we all say, yeah, that's good, but actually doing it. There's still a big gap there. Logically, I knew it's fine to be depressed. There's no shame in that. But emotionally, and this is pathetic to admit, emotionally, I just couldn't get there. So I just want to acknowledge that, and like we all know, it's much easier to give advice than take it. And I raise it now because I suspect this is much the same for all of us here in the room. We mean well, but it's quite hard to deliver. And I think the reason for that is that in this culture and many cultures, the definition of masculinity and being a good man is, I can sort stuff out, I can provide for my family, I can provide for people, we're tough, we're staunch, we're good fun, we're funny, we just get the job done. And that definition is so deeply ingrained in all of us that it's surprisingly difficult to get past. So look, I don't stand up here to proclaim that I have any solutions to this, but I think the way for us to go forward is to is to try and challenge that definition of what it is to be a man. You know, and it might sound a bit cliched, but I think it starts with us. But you know, I think if we can acknowledge a bit of ourselves that is emotional, that is vulnerable, and try and honour that in the same way that we do being resilient and tough, which are very useful characteristics. I'm not, you know, these can coexist happily. But I think if we can find that place of saying there is some value in being emotional, it's okay to be vulnerable. You know, I think that's going to help us. And I think for all of us, sooner or later, every one of us in this room is going to have a really tough day or a really difficult time, you know, and that's okay. You know, it's not fun, but that is just a normal part of the human condition, and it helps when you're in that space to be able to talk about it. So the challenge I put to myself and to you really is to try and kind of take this idea back into our homes or the car showroom or the workplace or the farm or the golf club or the rugby club, doesn't matter where, and try and lead a bit by example. You know, by which I mean, first of all, look at ourselves, you know, in an honest way and say, how am I behaving with other people? Because I think this is so ingrained, this macho man shit, that subliminally, without even thinking about it, we kind of endorse it, you know, just by being blokey. So I think looking at ourselves is good, and then I think if you you know, if we see someone if you think someone's struggling, you're probably right, you know, and I think when that happens, I think what we need to try and do is make ourselves genuinely open to listening and talking, and by which I don't mean just saying, "Are you okay?" They say, "Yeah, I'm fine," and you say, "Good, tick." You know, I've done that. That isn't talking. Just to finish my own experience, you know, I was clearly not functioning that well, and a lot of people said to me, "Oh, are you okay, Chris? How are you coping? This is tough after the quake," you know, blah blah. And I became the absolute master of saying, "Oh yeah, you know, it's really busy, but I'll be okay," or you know, "Yeah, we're doing fine. We've got lots of help," or "It'll be better in 1 week or 1 month or 1 year." You know, so all the usual excuses. And I just ploughed on, just sinking, basically, in a sort of dysfunctional mess. But luckily for me, I had a friend called Joe, who's a GP in the North Island, and he was more persistent. And he was more persistent because he'd been through this exact same thing himself. So Joe, sometime after the Kaikoura quake, Joe had seen me looking even greyer than usual, I think, on TV, and said, he rang me up and said, or wrote to me and said, "Hey, good job, blah, blah. You really need to look after yourself and your family, and you know, don't forget that." He had seen this train crash coming for some years, actually, probably. And I, of course, wrote back and said, "Thanks, Joe, very nice of you, but I'm fine." 2 weeks later, he wrote to me again. He said, "Chris, I was just like you. I didn't listen to the advice from my friends, and I really live to regret it. So I just implore you to look after yourself and look after your family first." And I wrote back to him again in the same vein, saying, "Hey, Joe, you're really kind. Thank you so much for your consideration. Yeah, I really, really appreciate that, but I'm absolutely fine." And my second tip is never believe anybody who says they're fine. Terrible word. I'll spare you the acronym. So Joe, but anyway, and then this is a really crucial thing. He was undeterred by me being a prat, basically. So he just quietly kept, not pushy, he just sent the odd text, sent the odd message, just kept trying. And I basically didn't respond to him at all, I don't think. But the months passed, I got worse and worse, and more overwhelmed and consumed by work, less, you know, hopeless really. And eventually I completely hit the wall very early one Monday morning, trying to recover from a weekend on call or something, and I just suddenly had this awful, awful moment of thinking, I actually don't think I'm going to get through the next 24 hours. I just cannot do this, which was very frightening. But luckily, in that moment, I was able to just put myself together enough just to message back Joe, this guy who'd been bombarding me with messages. So I sent him a message, and basically 40 seconds later, he rang me up, and he said, "Hey, mate, just stop. Whatever you're doing, just stop and go home." Now that's talking. That's proper talking. So that's my example of what I mean. And I just want to end, I'm sorry if I'm over time, on a very brief final comment pertaining to bravery, whatever that might be. And as Alistair said, I, by a whole combination of chance and accident, ended up at the CTV building and had a day that was really difficult to process, but as one of hundreds of people who did their utmost, literally everything humanly possible to try and help in a terrible situation. And then afterwards, I must have heard God knows how many times, "Oh, that was really brave." And that's always sat really uncomfortably on me. I don't believe that. For me, that wasn't about being brave. That was instinct, basically. you know, there's people trapped and dying in front of you, you're going to go and try and help. And that is not a difficult decision. What for me was very difficult, and which did require a lot of bravery, was to eventually, you know, stand up and say, you know, to my family and my colleagues and my patients and to everybody, I'm really struggling. I am so anxious I can hardly function, and I need some help. That took me some bravery. And my message really is, I think, if we want to progress individually and collectively into the society, I think that is the kind of brave we need to be. Thank you.